The owner of Waterfront Concerts is pushing back against media reports the amphitheater in Bangor is being sold. This comes as Live Nation settles an antitrust lawsuit with the Department of Justice. As part of the settlement, Live Nation must divest from a number of venues, including the Main Savings Amphitheater. According to Alex Gray, who owns Waterfront Concerts, that has no impact on the venue itself, only ticketing. The settlement allows him to go forward with a request for proposals for other ticketing partners.
Appreciate that if other outlets were to be a bit more accurate rather than fast. The reality of it is the city of Bangor does own the dirt that the property's there. It's a leased piece of property. Waterfront Concerts owns that lease. I own Waterfront Concerts wholly. And so if I read the agreement correctly, Live Nation does not have control. They do assist in booking, there's no question, but I do some of the booking myself, and I work with other multinational firms that are not Live Nation at times. Nothing changes other than the fact that it appears that I do not currently have a ticketing relationship with Ticketmaster if I understand the agreement.
Gray says he may sell Waterfront Concerts someday, but it won't be because of this lawsuit settlement.